Welcome. I'm Rogers Anderson, Williamson County's mayor, and as we travel around Williamson County and find some special people to interview today, our guest is one that will be no stranger to most of you watching TV and finding out a little bit about Mr. Billy Knigh. Thanks for being with us today and talking a little bit about the history of Williamson County. And I'm just going to get right into it. You're a lifelong resident of Williamson County.
You're correct.
Born and raised. Tell us a little bit about Billy Knigh and how you wound up here.
Well, I was born here. I lived with my grandmother, my mother, and my father, and a great uncle. All lived in the same house at one time when I was a very small child. And I was born and raised right out on Arno Road, where the crossroads of Trinity Peytonville. That was my grandmother's farm. She was a Pinkston. And my father's from Wilson County. He was between Murfreesboro and Lebanon. But anyway, that's where I started out in Williamson County. My forefathers were all there.
So you still live on the same farm?
Well, I have only 10 acres there on that corner.
But I mean, when I think back about in your lifetime, you've seen a lot of change.
Oh, Lord, yes.
And you went to school. Where'd you go to school? Most people don't probably realize the school. Tell me a little bit about those early days.
All right. Well, I went up to Rutherford School, which was 8 grades, a little one-room. Well, there's 2 rooms. We only used one schoolhouse. And we had one teacher. 16 kids. And she was pretty strict. Matter of fact, I'll have to tell this. I got a whipping the first day I went to Rutherford School. We didn't have many things to play with, but I sailed a rock up in there. It wasn't really my fault, and it hit this boy in the side of the head, and so he cried and rolled on the ground. So the big boy in the 8th grade said, when you go in, tell the teacher you did it accidentally on purpose.
Accidentally on purpose?
I didn't know the meaning of the word. I went in, she said, why did you hit Howard? I said, I did it accidentally on purpose. Man, she whipped me in a minute. And this boy was looking in the window laughing. But anyway, she taught me a lot.
So those times, those early days like that, when did the school start and when did it finish? Because you still had work to do, chores to do.
Oh yeah, when we, I believe it was, we usually at school by 8 o'clock and we got out at 3:30. Of course, when they had farm work to do, a lot of the boys were out, you know, they'd let them out of school to set out to Barker or whatever, you know, that kind of stuff, farm labor.
So how did I mean, Rutherville is on the way to where we know today is we're out Page Middle and Page High
That's Page School. That's where it's...
I wonder, and I understand those early days, the Page name came from a person in the educational field.
That's right, one of the
earlier people.
Yeah.
But Rutherville, where did that name come from?
Well, really, I've been told this, that it was some of my distant relatives way back. They came there, and one of them was named Rudder or something, and they said we're gonna name this Rutherville. But anyway, I think that's where part of the name came from. I don't know. Howard Green Smithson told me that, and he's a long time resident there.
In those early days when you would get off from school, you had your farming chores to do, but you also developed some traits. And my notes have been told me you've been electrician, a plumber. You've done a little bit of everything. So in those early days, we didn't have building permits, and we certainly didn't have inspectors to go out.
We had electrical inspectors in the early days.
Even in the early days, I did not realize
that. Now, what it was a state inspector. They probably didn't have very few, but my dad was an electrician. And of course, we lived on that farm and did farm work too, but when electricity came through, in the 40s. I was born without electricity in '34, and the people of the community were helped clear the right-of-ways, and they even took mules and pulled wire for them. You know, they helped the linemen put in electricity, and that was a big turn. When we had most houses, I remember going out with my dad, and they would have, it was during World War II, and he would have to go measure a house, and you could only get so much wire because copper was scarce. You know, they was using it for wartime stuff. And they'd have to go over to Muffinsburg. Middle Tennessee Electric was more or less just kind of starting then, I guess, and have a card to purchase X amount of feet of wire for a certain house. And one light and maybe a plug for radio and a plug for the refrigerator. That's about it.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask, because that's certainly before my time. I was born in 1948.
Yeah.
So the electrical systems we see today are an entirely different animal than what they were in those other days. I've heard my daddy say that his house only had one outlet.
That's right.
And it was mostly for the radio, if you could afford a radio.
That's right.
And you listened to the Grand Ole Opry and a few of those things, but there wasn't much on radio either.
No, we had a general store at Rutherford too at that time, and that general store included a blacksmith shop. It had a feed mill and a mill where you could grind flour and cornmeal. It was all. In other words, you could go to Rutherford store, and that's where everybody more or less traded about all that.
Kind of the dry goods place.
That's right. You buy your overalls.
Well, now, how many was in your family?
I'm the only child.
So that, and your daddy, how many did he have in his family?
It was 6.
And your mama, how many was in her?
6 in her family.
So there was a pretty good sized presence of the Knigh family.
Yeah,
by
the Pinkston
marriage,
family.
the Pinkston family by marriage.
They were closer than the Pinkston were in this county, and my dad was from Wilson County.
So after World War II and after the Korean War, before the Vietnam War, there's about a 15-year window after the Korean War and the Vietnam War that came along in history. You served in the military.
Yeah, Army, yeah.
And did you spend any time overseas, or all your time?
All mine was, I was several places in the United States, but I took my basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and then I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, was my second training, and then I was also I spent I believe a year at Fort Rucker, Alabama during the Berlin crisis, and when they had the Bay of Pigs and all that. We were supposed to be the first outfit to go to Laos on December the 24th, the 24th of December.
Right before Christmas.
Right, Christmas Eve, where they're going to drop us over there. But anyway, they canceled our orders.
So after you got out of the military, what made you want to come back?
Well, I wanted to get back home, Williamson County.
Now, were you married at this time?
I'm married.
Better be real
right
careful.
In 60. I was right at that time I married. I'd say. Yeah, I was married part of the time I was in the military.
And I understand you had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Son's still active in our business.
That's right.
Still here in town, still doing plumbing, electrical, I guess a little bit of everything.
And my daughter, I have one that works up at Muffinsburg, and she lives on Crowder Road. We all live right there in a circle. And my other daughter works down off of Carruthers Parkway, and she lives on Meeks Road. So they all within a mile or 2 of each other.
Talk to me about some of the changes that have occurred in Williamson County.
I'd say electricity made a big change in this county because the farmers that used to do all manual labor for milking and that type thing, I milk cows by hand, but they got milking machines and, just so much different things today.
Other areas, you're pretty much, you grew up in an agricultural environment.
Yes, sir.
You've spent your entire working life kind of in a trade skill business.
Yeah, electrical and plumbing.
Electrical and plumbing. A
Now,
lot of changes.
My dad had a part of the store up at, it's a 2 stores at Rutherford at one time, and the upper was a block building, and he had I guess, sold probably some of the first TVs and appliances, you know. He started selling a few electrical stoves and refrigerators to different people in the country. And of course we did the electrical work, and of course there wasn't that much building and stuff going on back then, and we got into the plumbing business and putting in well pumps, you know. People got, because when I came up, they were drawing water with a well bucket, you know, with a chain. And actually I believe in my early days, we probably milked 12, 13 cows by hand, and we drew out the well water to cool it with in tubs, set it in cans and cool it. And I think about women, how much work they had to do. I remember on Monday, my mother always washed. They had a washboard and just scrubbing, and we made soap. And I remember one time in the communities, they killed a beef and pulled him up in the bonnet of a barn we had there, and a lot of people in the community, they canned that beef. And
canned the beef?
Canned it and put it in about a gallon fruit jar, and we ate it, you know, for Sunday meal. We had, you know, they kept, people in the country then are more or less self-sustained. I mean, grew the vegetables and preserved them, and we didn't know, we bought a little stuff at the store, but I does very little.
But it was a different way of life.
Oh, yeah.
And you really didn't have any other choice.
That's right.
If you wanted to eat.
That's right.
Well, today, like just for you to come in to do this show, which I greatly appreciate, but I imagine it would take several good hours to come from down in Rutherville to come into the heart of Franklin.
No, I tell you what, when I started Franklin High School, Jimmy Gentry was the first year he coached at Franklin High School. And I have walked from my house after a football game.
From Franklin?
From Franklin. Me and another friend of mine, he lived a little farther out than I did, Bobby Cotton.
Bobby Cotton.
He's passed away now, but anyway, we were classmates in high school. But it wasn't too far. I wasn't ever a football player much, but I did a couple of years. I came out and played a little football. And
well, was the mode of transportation, I know most of it is probably walking.
Oh, that's right. But we had school buses.
You had school buses in those early days.
And we used them buses then.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't use a lot of them today. But and I would say, in you're working with your dad in the business. You had a vehicle?
Yeah, yeah.
But I'd say in your early days, you probably also had horses or mules.
Yeah, you know, used to a garden. You wanted to work it with a mule. They wouldn't use a tractor. I never heard of a rototiller till later years. But they used a mule to plow the garden.
Well, and that's what I was asking. There's just been so many changes.
Oh, Lord. And you know, I see these people with the big combines and things, and they grew wheat and small grain on my grandmother's farm there. And I remember when I was a kid shocking wheat, and
well, now you got to explain what shocking wheat means.
Well, it was, you stack it out in the field, and you put a cap on it, they called it. You spread one bundle. Well, start out with, they called it a binder. It would cut the wheat, and it'd be in little bundles about this size, and we'd put them brown in a circle and cap it off. And then a thrashing machine came through the country, and they had, of course, mules and wagons. And I tell you, a boy in this county, Floyd Hunter, me and him worked down there one year on the farm, and you could barely get a sack of wheat up on one of them horse wagons that's so tall, you know, when there's thrashing machine. and they'd haul it to the barn and pour it out in a granary so they'd have sacks to use the next day at the, when they're thrashing the wheat. And we'd have a big straw stack. And then they'd come in with a baler, and the bale of wheat straw was mules going around in a circle. I don't know whether you've ever seen one
I've
of those.
never seen that.
And it took two people on the baler. You punch wires through on this side, and that guy on that side caught the wire. They had blocks in it, and tie the wires. And they raised some broom corn. That's one thing in this county. They raised quite a bit of that, and they cut it and they left it, and it'd be just like a big table out in the field, and you cut it and lay it up here, and then they had what they call a broom corn thrasher, and of course all this was done old ways,
Pretty much by hand.
That's right. Everything was handled by hand.
Well, now you had to have some income.
Oh yeah. Well, more or less, the milk was the income. You sold milk, and it paid for your groceries.
and the wheat and the thrashing.
You had money coming in
money
at
for
one
that
time,
too. What was the typical earnings back in those days? I mean, I
remember I worked at that shocking that wheat was my first venture. I was probably a small kid. It was during World War II, and there wasn't very many able bodies in the country. And this man asked my dad, could I help him shock wheat? He said, yeah. And he said, I'll give him 50 cents a day.
50 cents a day.
I didn't know what I didn't have made any money. I didn't. But anyway, I worked, man. We worked 6 days, and they lined up on Saturday at dark night. I got $3, and men were getting $2.50 a day. I mean, grown men. So the next week, I always respected this man, Walter Smith. He was raising the wheat, and he said, Billy says, he was riding on the binder, He said, said, you worked like a man this week, I'm gonna pay you like a man. So I got a raise up to $2.50. That's very unusual, it. And
well, it's interesting the way you describe that. You work like a man, so you're gonna get a man's wages.
That's right.
It wasn't so much an hour. You got the job finished, and they paid you what?
That's right.
Those early days.
The days were long too. We carried a water in a wooden jug. A big old wooden water jug.
The world you came from taught you a lot of values.
Oh, right.
Hard work.
Hard work.
And being loyal, finishing a job, the things that have made you and who you are today. And that value system never leaves us.
No, sir.
Never leaves us. And I look at the way we do things today, they're more modern.
Oh, yeah.
There's certainly more equipment used.
Right.
And I look at the way our county has continued to grow. What do you think the next 25 years of Williamson County is going to be looking like?
My dad used to say, we went to the first time I went to the state fair, we went on the interurban, which was a trolley.
Mm-hmm.
They left down about where the, I guess First Tennessee Bank was. There's a building there where it pulled under. And he had a car. We rode down there. We got on this trolley and went to the fair. And I remember we stayed till dark and watching those sparks fly. And he said one time, in a few years, you won't know Franklin from Nashville. And that's about true now. You won't know when you leave Franklin.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the trolley in those early days, that inner trolley. It took a couple of hours to get to Nashville.
Yeah.
And then we got away from it, and now we're trying to get
back
to it.
Right.
And it's a very difficult thing to get
Yeah.
back because people have fell in love with their automobiles.
Yeah, that's right.
And to move around in our community. And I know that you probably knew a lot of those early men that served on the old quarterly court, the Bob Morans, and Clint, Clyde Lynch,
Clyde Lynch,
and certainly
Clyde Pewitt.
Clyde Pewitt, some of those older men that served way back when Jerry, I'm trying to
Jerry
think.
Fly.
Jerry Fly.
I mean, I remember old Mr. Fly. He
Mr.
lived
Fly.
over on Wilson Pike, you know. Mr. Shady Wilson, which was the whip of the county at one time.
I haven't heard that name used, but you're right. In some of those places out there, and so the Rudderville area, now known mostly as Page area,
right.
You've seen a lot of growth and development, but that area has, for the most part, remained rural in nature.
Well, the Harpeth River had a lot to do with that, I think, because a lot of flood land right through there. Matter of fact, that farmland over my grandmother's place, a lot of it floods. I remember swimming in that river every day just about years ago, and it would get up within right at the yard fence, but it never did get in the house or anything.
So if you look back in those days, and you mentioned Middle Tennessee Electric, which we just take it for granted now,
right.
In this studio, all the lights and the mics, that's all being pushed by electricity. But in the early days, I remember my dad speaking about what an impact TVA had for a community.
That's right.
People forget, but it was all about flood control when TVA, they put the dams in to control the waters.
Yeah.
And they got electricity as a byproduct
Yeah.
of that. But the dams and the TVA system was literally put in for flood control.
No, you're right.
And as you look back over those years and you try to look out into the future, if you're here another 100 years, then you'll see a lot more changes. But you have made what Williamson County, great people have come through. We mentioned a few of them, but I think about a Mr. Ed Moody. I think about some fine men that have come through over the years.
I think, maybe I got my first bicycle from Mr. Ed. Down on Main Street. They had a tire place down on Main Street.
Well, I mean, we think of businesses today, but in your era, and when I first moved here years ago, everything was around Franklin.
That's right.
All the car dealerships, you know, Hardcastle and a few of those early
movie theater.
You know, it probably cost you a nickel to go to the movie theater or something.
12 cents.
12 cents, whatever it was.
For a kid.
But that was a real treat for a young man to be able to take his girlfriend to and go uptown.
Country boys made it to town on Saturday. You know, we had a lot of us did. We rode a milk truck, which they probably wouldn't let you do. Picked up that canned milk. He'd let us ride into Franklin. We'd go to the Franklin Theater.
Well, you know, when you look at that period of time, as hard as it was, you didn't know any different, but it was a good time, Mr. Knigh.
Yeah. Well, our standard of living is so much better, but I think about it sometimes. We have to work so hard to afford the style of living we have today. And back then, we worked to survive. I think that's
a good point. Because you put up everything for eating.
That's right.
And your clothes, a lot of those were probably made by your mama.
I remember her wanting these flour sacks with, I don't know whether you remember that or not, but they used to print them. Be sure and they bought flour with a 48 or 25 pounds.
I've watched my grandmother make a mini quilt.
Yeah.
And I've watched her take an old man's shirt or his breeches, his overalls, and as part of that quilt.
That's right. And patch them.
And patch them. And keep those types of things going. That and particularly you would also see a lot of families, not necessarily yours, but a lot of families had a lot of brothers and sisters. But they did that because they had to have that for the farm.
That's right. And you know, my school teacher, 8th grade school teacher, was at my 80th birthday party. She's up in the 90s. I really honored to have her there. And
now, who was that? What was her?
Eleanor Nolan. Now, Norman Nolan was a commissioner.
Yes, I've seen that
her,
name.
His wife, Ms. Nolan, she was one of my school teachers.
And the school teachers back then, they were paid nothing.
That's right. I tell you, one time, Rutherford School got down below they had a certain mark. They had to have so many kids before county would pay the teachers, and they, the people in the community chipped in $1 apiece a month to pay the school teacher for 1 month there, I think, or something. I heard my dad talk about it.
$1 a month.
Yeah, and working the roads back then is something else. They used to haul gravel out of the Harpeth River down there, right there on Trinity, Peytonville Road, and they had a big pile right down below where I live there for the wintertime. And they'd take mules and wagons and they had to, I guess, people had to work on the road then so many days. You had to either work on the road or
Now you're talking about citizens.
That's right.
Everybody had to
Give so many days on the road, or you had to pay somebody too, I think. A lot of them, they'd bring a team of mules and a wagon, and these wagons, they'd put 2x4s on the bottom where you get all the rock up. And see, they'd get down in that river when it's low and shovels and fill a wagon up and pull it out with mules and stockpile them for the wintertime. That's kind of unreal, but
I never knew that.
yes, sir. I've seen them do it. I watched them when I was a very small kid then, probably 6 or 7 years old, and they was down in that would have been, I was born in 34, so that would probably have been around 39 or so. I was a little bitty kid. I remember going down and watching them whip them mules to make them come out of that river with a load of gravel, you know.
And then each person was expected to
Yeah,
help.
that's what I found out in later years, that each citizen was, and our telephone out in that community was the same. We had a telephone, but Bell, South Bell, whatever it was probably on Gosey Hill Road as far as they went. So the farmers, they had a farmer's line, 8 people, and they had to keep that line up. I heard them. The store up, they'd call my dad and said, "Earl, get your light out. We got to work on the telephone line today."
Well, that's probably, but for your dad, who was an electrician, that was probably easy for him to comprehend. A lot of people don't deal with electricity.
And they'd get out there and had a crank telephone.
Yeah. Well, now as a boy growing up, we had a party line.
Yeah, that's what this was. 8 people on.
We had 4. And you had 1 ring and then 2 rings, and I don't remember all the other stuff that went with
That
it.
was long too short.
Yeah, and you'd listen to the boys would listen to the neighborhood girl talk.
Yeah.
We'd take the speaker out. Mr. Knight, our time's gone. We got to go. Thanks for taking time out
I
and being with us.
appreciate it, being here.
And Billy Knight, one of our Williamson County residents, born, raised here, still lives here, still got a business here, got children here. Call him up, use his services. Again, I'm Rogers Anderson. We'll see you around the county at the next time. Have a good day.